No luck, huh? Is anybody on a newer iPad and knows how to turn this thing off where it follows you?
I didn't know that even existed.
I think it's actually kind of fun, Sage. It's fun to watch you walk around your office.
This is my filing office. It's very strange. I don't know how to turn it off. I just Googled everything. If anybody has an idea, let me know.
No,
put a
part
piece of
your-
paper in front of it.
Anna?
Yes.
Okay, great. Did you receive the public comment?
I did.
Great. All right, let's go ahead and begin then. Thank you.
Are we recording?
Yes, we are.
All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I am chair of the Sustainability Advisory Committee on Energy and the Environment. My name is Anna Priest, and I would like to welcome you to our January 19th, 2022 meeting. All committee members and staff are participating virtually, so we appreciate your patience. Obviously, we had a huge little setback, but looks like we're on track now. So thank you, everyone. We're working hard to get us on track. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the link on the front page of the city's website and also on the committee's website. We also have an option, I believe still, for the public to listen live by phone. And for those of you who are out there with us today, welcome. I'll now go through and introduce all the committee members who are participating virtually. Please make sure to keep your microphone muted if you're not speaking. And when you have a question or would like to speak, please use the raise hand button or unmute your microphone. And then please mute it again after you're done speaking. All right, committee members, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Ann Keller.
Good evening, everyone.
Kim Austin.
Hi, everyone.
Maggie Gulick.
Hi.
Tim Orman.
Good afternoon.
Chris Pellrine.
Hello.
Steve Barron.
Hello, hello.
Allison Ormsby.
Greetings.
And I would like to welcome our newest Sacee member, Michael Totten. Would you like to do a brief introduction?
Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate being here with everybody. I've been following your great works for a while now and decided I moved here 9 months ago, my wife and I, from Denver, Colorado. And then before that, we were 25 years in Washington, D.C. And I've pretty much been doing both nonprofit and government and private enterprise for the last 45 years, all focused on trying to shrink the economy's ecological impacts. And I might stop right there.
Great. Thank you, Michael. We also have Sage Turner, who's our City Council liaison.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hey, Sage. And we have staff members from the Sustainability Office, Amber Weaver, Bridget Herring, and Kira Boulin. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started on the agenda items. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud and do a vocal roll call for each vote if required. And again, if you would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature in your Google call. All right. Let me jump over to the agenda here. So first item on the agenda is to approve the October minutes. Has everyone gotten a chance to review the minutes? And is there a motion to approve?
I will motion to approve the October
All right,
minutes.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a second? And then we can discuss if there's any edits.
I'll second.
Thank you, Tim. Does anyone have any edits or comments, questions about the October minutes? Great. All right. So then I'm going to run down the list of board members and you will say yay or nay to approve or not approve the minutes. Ann Keller.
Yay.
Kim. Awesome.
Yay.
Thank you. Maggie.
Yay.
Tim.
Yay.
Michael.
Yay.
Chris.
Yay.
Steve.
Yay.
Allison.
Yay.
And I am also a yay. So minutes have been approved. Second item on the agenda is the public comment, which we received one public comment that I believe has been circulated regarding the open space ordinance. So please review that public comment from Sharon Sumrall. Thank you for providing that comment, Sharon.
Anna, do you want to go ahead and read it?
Oh, I can read it out loud? Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. My name is Sharon Sumrall, and I was a committee member on the open space rewrite as a member of the Neighborhood Advisory Commission. I am also on the UFC and Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods. I'm opposed to the current iteration of the open space for the following reason that I pulled out of the new OS amendment. Recreational space includes for every 250 square feet of required OS being open space from here on out, 1 linear foot of seating shall be provided and OS credits for private or common balconies. Response: why should private balconies that are not publicly accessed be credit worthy, and why a bench for every 250 square feet? That is a lot of impermeable surface. OS should be maintained in perpetuity. Response: except if an amendment is approved, such as in a CZ B1 condition, or if another type of variance is requested. Required setbacks may be counted for up to half of a developer's OS requirements. Required property line buffers and an unlimited amount of these buffers may count towards up to 100% of a developer's OS requirements if the slope is less than 15%. Response: why give credit for what is already required? Retaining walls over 18 inches in height must provide a walkable connection that is a minimum of 6 feet wide. Response: this is hardly ever possible nor practical. I'm a landscape contractor, and behind most walls is a vegetative buffer to hold the soil. This requirement makes no sense. The affordable housing clause is set to the ambiguous term below 80% AMI for 30 years, etc. Response: this is my experience that most developers will not use this as a criterion for OS credits due to how it is written, and it is entirely voluntary. This could be a great clause if written with more specifics to AMI. Provides a fee in lieu provision to allow developers to pay their way out of 100% of their open space requirement, but fails to set a policy on how or when open space fee in lieu funds may and shall be spent for the purchase of new public lands for the city. Lastly, The example that is being cited in the presentation showing the old Kmart. It is stated that large impervious sites will never treat their share of stormwater that contributes to nuisance flooding. This site is currently being repurposed, and the stormwater control measures being asked for by the city of Asheville in the new design are mitigating the type of runoff that this old site is currently producing, with the addition of proper drainage, trees, and less impervious surfaces. UFC is opposed to the current draft, as is NAC, both basically wanting to see Asheville as a leader in open space, and the severe reductions will greatly impact the quality of neighborhoods in their green infrastructure and cause more heat island conditions due to the increases of impermeable surfaces, as well as other mitigating factors. Thank you. Whew. Didn't know I was going to start off reading that. Good thing I have a glass of water here.
Anna, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
As we move into updates, because we're running behind, I'd like to ask Marisol Jimenez with Tapiac Consulting to provide her presentation before open space because she has some time constraints.
Okay, great. So I'd like to welcome Marisol. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Marisol Jimenez, she, her pronouns, and I'm the founder and lead consultant for Tepeyac Consulting. And just really happy to be here and thank Amber and Kira for inviting me to present our work to you. Amber, I think you were going to do some opening framing for us.
Yes, I can. Let's go to the next slide. So just some key takeaways here, and these are takeaways that we'll also be relaying to City Council. What this work entailed is coming up with a community-defined understanding of climate equity, climate justice, and climate resilience. Some of the outputs that we have been able to create with this work is also the climate justice data map, which we presented to the Sustainability Advisory Committee in the past. We also have a climate justice screening tool. It's a guide and a tool. This tool will be utilized as the city moves to implement projects, examines policies and practices and procedures. It also fits into the GARE racial toolkit, which is something that our equity and inclusion department is still continuing to train staff on. And I think finally, just to highlight the importance of climate equity and climate justice and how it's going to these terms and ways of working on projects and implementing projects are both internal uses as well as communicating this externally and how we will be utilizing the screening tool.
Okay.
Kira, next slide.
Yeah, so I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to do a quick overview with you all of the work that we have done over the past 2 years. And so as Amber just shared, she's already shared the good work that was done around developing these climate justice maps and identifying climate vulnerability zones in and around the city of Asheville. So what I'll be sharing with you today kind of picks up where that leaves off. And so I want to share with you some of what we learned through what we call a listening and learning, which is essentially a practice of gathering stories, experiences, and ideas. And in this case, specifically those of people who are living on the front lines of structural racism and climate change in the city of Asheville, as well as the voices of city government. And these conversations directly informed how we approached developing the climate justice screening tool that I'll also be sharing with you today. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about work we've been doing with Youth Artists Empowered, which is a team of teaching artists and young BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, POC artists who have also been capturing the story of climate change and climate resilience, but through the lens of art. Here a slide. So Voices from the Front Line was our first listening and learning process where I interviewed over a dozen frontline BIPOC leaders from throughout the city. And so when I use the language of frontline, what I mean are BIPOC leaders who have been living and working in Asheville's BIPOC communities of color for over a decade, right? Like not only living in these communities, but organizing in these communities. I also want to say that these interviews were held in the late summer of 2020, when a lot of these leaders were already organizing social safety nets around their communities in the face of COVID. And so these questions that we were bringing about building community resilience and what that meant in the face of potentially large-scale social collapse were certainly things that were fresh on their minds. So from these conversations, we emerged with this community definition that Amber referenced of climate justice, which really for these folks distilled down to one, access, secondly, sovereignty and self-direction, and then thirdly, this question of long-term sustainability. So essentially, this meant that communities would have access to the information, the relationships, and resources that they would need to be able to build community-led and community-owned social safety nets, both in the face of climate collapse, but also in terms of longer-term community investment. When we asked folks to talk about what they were learning around community resilience, they named these three pillars of economic power, healthy environments, and strong social networks. These three pillars are what hold up the social safety nets that were being reactivated and constructed in the face of COVID and pandemic. They are also the pillars that would be activated and holding up any climate resiliency plans that would happen in our communities. When they were asked to describe what their climate justice concerns were, this is the point at a listening and learning process where we start to surface what we call equity choice points. So essentially, equity choice points are these areas where after listening, learning, doing some research and investigation, you start to identify places that you can now name. What was once a question now becomes a choice point where the city has an opportunity to adapt, to respond towards deeper equity and towards climate justice work. And this can look like any manner of things, from opportunities to expand and grow already good equity work that's happening, evolving the work to be in deeper alignment with shifting values or mission. Also responding to a deepened equity analysis, which I'll touch more on, that's happening in the city. And then lastly, challenges and harms that perhaps you weren't aware were happening, but now they are within your awareness. So at that point, decisions around strategies and resource distribution become choice points. They become choices to amplify equity or to delay it, or simply to not. So when community members described these equity choice points, and particularly in the face of real potential for climate crisis events, they named a few things. One was certainly an escalation of already occurring displacement from the city. Secondly was not feeling safe or necessarily trusting that evacuation and emergency response plans would take care of everybody in our community. Next were the compounding impacts of climate crisis and already existing inequities around structural racism, everything from health outcomes to housing to wealth to safety and survival. And then lastly was this growing awareness that frontline communities, that our communities are not in Western North Carolina are not organizing around climate issues yet. And instead, resources and attention are really focused on more immediately presenting crises like COVID, police brutality, housing displacement, job security. Slide. And so then we also wanted to make sure that as we started identifying these equity choice points that frontline community were naming, that we also took time to listen to staff and leadership throughout the city and who were positioned in different departments throughout the city to learn more about the equity work that has already been happening, as well as to seek guidance around how to design a useful climate justice screening tool. So certainly one of the first things that people talked about in our conversations was the creation of the Office of Equity and Inclusion in 2017, joining the Governmental Alliance on Race and Equity, GARE, and then adopting the GARE toolkit throughout the organization. And staff described the value added of having these equity tools and the important support systems that the Office of Equity and Inclusion offered that allowed them to try on and advance equity strategies. So the Office of Equity and Inclusion really what it was offering as a support system around these emerging equity analysis and strategies were things like foundational capacity to departments, training, technical assistance, coaching, network building, even supporting interdepartmental network building, as well as offering, key resources around community engagement to the departments. So one of the lessons certainly was that when the Office of Equity and Inclusion went into some leadership transition and the office was essentially de facto closed for some time, the loss of that support system was really felt by city staff as they continued to try to implement the GARE toolkit and their equity strategies. So the GARE toolkit essentially was what staff were leaning on in order to be able to continue doing equity work in some departments. And this was where we were really interested also around how we could learn about the value of a climate justice screening tool. And so what they named essentially what was the support that a tool offered was that equity tools were seen as a way to present their analysis and the intentionality behind proposing equity strategies, particularly innovative or dynamic shifting equity strategies, that this gave them something to lean on about the good thinking and intentionality that went behind those proposals, as well as being able to communicate and advocate those decisions, both to decision makers as well as to community members who may come with questions about that. They also thought that the tool offered real guidance, almost like a roadmap in what it meant to practice equity, not like, oh, here's a checklist, I ticked off my 5 items, but more as an ongoing practice that could be and should be really implemented and included throughout the process, everything from setting priorities, distributing resources, to designing projects and evaluating their work. And then lastly, in the context specifically of climate and climate responses, folks saw the importance of a tool like this as they're trying to figure out how to make equitable choices when planning for emergencies, for recovery, for adaptation, for mitigation, that these tools would help them apply a lens of looking at the city through an equity lens. Slide. Certainly, and this is not something that's unique to the city, any organization or community that's undertaking equity is going to encounter challenges and obstacles to those efforts, and the city is no different. So folks definitely named what some of those challenges were. So one is that equity is simply a political issue. It's a politicized issue. And so there's really a recognition that at some point, equity will come up against the structures of inequity or policies, practices, budgets, procedures that don't always align with emerging equity strategies. There's also work to still be done around shifting culture internally, and that some of that culture shifting that is still happening within the city falls along lines of power and influence around decisions that are made within the city. And particularly, one place where people were naming that there was some stuckness is in building more clarity and discernment about the difference between a framework of equity versus a framework of equality, right? Like, so is justice and fairness that everybody gets the same thing? Or is justice and fairness that we have to invest differentially in order to get everybody to the same outcome, right? And that kind of nuance and discernment is one that can create like potholes for equity conversations where equity strategies in an equality framework come up against these understandings of what it means to be fair or what it means to be just. Another challenge that people named was inequitable voice and influence, and that the city is very often positioned to be reactive to complaints. So the city moves when complaints happen, or the city reacts to problems, and that a lot of times who feels empowered or even aware of how to file and move a complaint through the city is going to align with, class and race and geography and all these things that encourage me to feel like my voice matters. And not only does my voice matter, but I know how to work the system to get my voice amplified. And so these dynamics meant that there was this sort of implicit power dynamic around what complaints rise to the surface and get responded to versus which never even necessarily get voiced or don't get fully voiced within the system or within the organization. And this lends to the third challenge, which is, I would say, related to the climate justice question, particularly when you're talking about land and land sovereignty, and being able to stay in place. But it is how these things all kind of come into the challenge, the leadership challenge and the equity challenge, which is building and implementing an impactful reparations resolution response. And so certainly being able to effectively engage, particularly Black community, in defining the issues and leading in the solutions and being able to access and participate in that project directly relates to how well the city is or isn't able to effectively engage long-term with communities, period, but frontline communities in particular. The next challenge that I would lift up is this question around investing in equity capacity. So in order to be successful at doing consistent, ongoing equity work, as well as its twin of equitable community engagement work, certainly there needs to be resources dedicated to that. Including building capacity among staff in an ongoing way, the trainings, the workshops, the coaching, the technical assistance, but then who offers that? And how are they resourced in order to be able to offer those in an impactful and sustainable way over the long term? But it also meant, possibly exploring what collaborations need to exist between the Office of Sustainability and the Office of Equity and Inclusion to offer that type of capacity and support. It also lent to questions around the distribution of resources in the city overall and community investments that would be necessary to actually implement some of these equity strategies, right? And that gets us to that last piece around how the city makes decisions about where to plant trees, which stormwater to address, which pipes to fix, where to place compost bins. All of those things end up being questions that would be relevant to an equity lens and have to do with the distribution of city resources and who is able to advocate effectively to say, in order for the city overall to be resilient, we need to make sure that we are addressing already existing disparities, as well as investing in the long-term resilience of our climate vulnerability communities, which are disproportionately where BIPOC people are living. Last slide. Sorry. Talk about needing water. And okay, so recommendations, right? This was the guidance that was offered to us. One was certainly to build on the already good work that has happened around the investments and the creation of the Office of Equity and Inclusion, the building of capacity around the use of the GARE toolkit, and how does the climate justice screening tool sort of onboard into all of that investment and foundation in ways that are complementary to the GARE toolkit. So it wouldn't be like, oh, and then there's this whole other training and orientation and capacity building for the climate justice screening tool, but to really build on what's already been created, as well as the lessons that have been learned around what feels particularly helpful and may need more investment in the Office of Equity and Inclusion and the Office of Sustainability to really make the GARE toolkit and the climate justice screening tool put down roots and have real traction. The second recommendation was collaborate with departments. Like, you can't build a single tool and then think that it's going to plug and play for every department, or that every department is going to have the same readiness or capacity to begin innovating, really like innovating equity strategies. Yeah, like that is its own skill set and its own practice. And so there was a lot of feedback that sounded like, build these tools for the citywide. And then the technical assistance and coaching that we need is to make it make sense for my department. Work with me as a department lead to be able to apply these tools in ways that resonate with my staff and the work that is in front of us, and support us in developing some of these strategies and thought partnering and testing them out so that we have a better shot of being able to do good equity and climate justice work. And then lastly was, there's like, it's penetrating into the city, and the Office of Equity and Inclusion's work in building equity capacity, like department heads across the departments, but not quite yet all the way into the departments where like all your departmental staff have the same language and frameworks and background to be able to do this. So there was definitely an ask that that capacity continue to be built deeper into the departments. And then offering ongoing coaching and support as people are innovating and piloting things that sometimes will work and sometimes won't. And how do they adapt and pivot and as well as tell those stories to decision makers in a way that encourage continued investment and don't necessarily like punish the failure of innovation. Thirdly, it's this piece around committing resources to racial equity and climate justice, and most particularly making sure that the Office of Equity and Inclusion and the Office of Sustainability have the staff capacity and the time that they would need to work individually with each department to be available for that coaching and offering that technical assistance. And then lastly, related to that is investing in community engagement capacity. I mean, people were like, there was like they're banging their head against the wall. Like we try and we've tried this and we've tried that, and we can't quite figure out how to gain traction around community engagement. And some of that is that we don't know how, and our strategies haven't yet been effective. Some of that is around, we need time to be in consistent relationship with community, not just show up when we need something, but consistent relationship and presence, which is a lot of staff time. So some of what would be needed is not only training and capacity building on effective community engagement approaches, but actually dedicated staff positions and support to be able to have that consistent presence. So out of this comes the climate justice screening tool. We incorporated all of that feedback from the slide, Kara. We incorporated all of that feedback from the front lines, all of that feedback from city staff, and we started developing a climate justice screening tool. And so the tool is used, it's meant to help city staff and city council be able to identify and understand what we mean, what climate justice implications would look like in a policy or a proposal, and to take it as far as work plans, budgeting, legislative decisions. And it's a way of being able to practice applying a tool. It's some like markers along the way that say, hey, you are about to approach an equity choice point. Okay. And the idea is that this would allow people to be able to proactively consider these decisions from the very beginning, instead of be reacting to complaints or reacting to harm or reacting to challenges, but actually to build it in proactively from, proposal to design to implementation to evaluation, as well as to support city council in being able to make decisions, again, that are backed by real intentionality and a practice of discernment. And again, that this would be used in budgeting, midstream, in evaluations. And yeah, so that would be the climate justice screening tool. I will drop the working draft. I'm sure it did. Okay, I just dropped a link to the working draft of the tool. This is just the tool part. It will come with bookends of some context setting, how to use the tool, some key language that is aligned with what the Office of Equity and Inclusion has already developed, as well as some of our own language. For example, what is climate justice and community resiliency? And this is the tool that we're offering as a living document for how departments can begin practicing climate justice discernment and practice. And then last slide. And the last piece that I'll share with you is that to stay tuned, because we have been working with this incredible crew of teaching artists and young artists who've been doing what we call a photo voice project. So they've been going into neighborhoods and communities that have been considered climate vulnerable, taking pictures, talking to elders, talking to residents, building their own analysis. And we're currently in conversations with the Asheville Art Museum to get them a gallery showing in the spring. We're looking at the potential of March. And so as soon as we are able to confirm, like, this is when the exhibition will be of their work, we will let Sacee know for sure, because we would love to have you there, have city council, and really celebrate these youth for building their own analysis about what this means for them as the ones who will likely be frontline leaders leading this work in the next 10 years. I think that's it. And then key takeaways again, right, Amber?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're very much the same as they are the same as the beginning key takeaways. Thank you, Marisol. I really appreciate you going over the work that has taken place over the last 18 plus months. At this point in time, if you have a few minutes, if there's any questions from the Sustainability Advisory Committee members.
Can we stop sharing the screen so I can see more people? Thank you, Kara. Thanks for running the PowerPoint, Kara.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation.
Thanks. Mm-hmm.
Same here. It sounds like you did a lot of amazing work with really impactful community members. So
Yeah,
really excited to see that toolkit implemented.
Marisol, in other communities where you have undertaken a similar type of project, how long has it taken to see the beginnings and the real outcomes that you're focusing on that people are interested in?
You mean in terms of actually implementing an equity action plan or in terms of climate resilience?
Well, in this case, they're kind of married. I'm not sure. Pick either one. I'm just trying to get a sense of the length of time because you're moving government structure, people's viewpoints and opinions, experience, all that. It's not a fast thing. I just wanted to know if you had a measure of time.
So, I would say that the most parallel project that I've worked on is actually one in Eastern North Carolina. So I've been working with a foundation called the Amplify Fund, and they're a national foundation, and they've been working with cohorts, collectives that are at the front lines of climate crisis. And one of those front lines is in Eastern North Carolina. And so a lot of the time that I was doing this work in Western North Carolina, the juxtaposition of that was just fascinating because, for Eastern North Carolina, of course, they're dealing with all of the same frontline issues around COVID and police and voting, and all of that was happening simultaneously, but they were also experiencing hurricanes and flooding and black mold and so all of that organizing was happening simultaneously. So it was this I want to say forecasting of what we haven't felt yet in the same way in Western North Carolina. And so, what I would say is that their advocacy in Eastern North Carolina has been constant. They're very well organized. They've built their own rescue and recovery systems outside of city government and outside of federal response because their experience over the last number of years has been they get left behind. Literally, they get left behind standing in floodwaters. And it's only community organizations that have chartered planes, gotten boats, created GIS maps of where people are, gone and pulled people into the boats out of their homes without any government assistance. That really we can see the potentiality of what it looks like when we don't move. Right? When government doesn't move, is that city is left to its own community is left to its own survival devices. And so there's this parallel of as a community, we got to start figuring this out now. We got to get radios in people's hands so they can practice with them. Solar powered generators is part of the ART project. We got to get people starting to think about what would this look like? But it's so hard to imagine the possibility when it feels far away. So that's the work in the community, and the work in the city is to position the city to be an ongoing dialogue with the community, in terms of that preparation, in terms of what that means as far as reparations goes. How long does that take? How long has it taken? That would be my response. This is an ongoing effort. The city is always facing equity choice points. And I would say that there's a lot of really powerful work that could happen in building that capacity and getting equity action plans developed and piloted in the next 2 years. But will the issue be like, glad we addressed that climate justice issue in 2 years? It won't, but the city will surely be much further ahead if it starts now than if it waits for the crisis to be acutely here. And then in the middle of the crisis, like we had to do with COVID, is suddenly having to move all these gears, right? And the city did do that with COVID. There was this dramatic, presence in the community, distribution of resources that happened. So we can crisis manage this thing, or we can start like planning proactively and building the framework for it now. So I would say 2 years, you could see equity strategies gaining traction and being practiced. Will they be perfect and the solution for all? No, they won't. I hope that's a helpful answer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sage, you had a question?
Well, thank you, Marisol. It's nice to see you. This is the first I've heard of the presentation, so I'm curious both like where you go next with this information and how Sacee might be able to help you along that path or encourage you along that path. And then a couple things came to mind. You know, we were talking about open space earlier and in lieu funds, and there's also the tree canopy protection ordinance. So, oh, I'm sorry, there's gonna be a ringer. What people may not realize is that we did have our first project come through that is going to contribute, I think it's $500,000 to the tree. To the tree fund, but there hasn't been, to my knowledge, any kind of plan on how that is equitably planted or chosen or where or how or who. And that, to your point, I agree somewhat. We're in a constantly reactive state, especially during the pandemic. But these are opportunities to get ahead. You know, we haven't adopted the open space ordinance yet. And the way it works, so y'all know, is that when a project comes forth that can't meet those requirements and gets that in lieu fund, you don't actually get the money until they open their doors at the time of CO. So the first one is that for the tree protection fund is the Amazon facility that is supposed to be constructed in 2022. So at the end of this year, we might see $500,000 dropped into a fund that could be activated, but we don't quite have a plan yet. So great. I mean, this is, Marisol, you'd be great on this. So I hope that this is where this leads, that you all will start doing work on that kind of thing, or just let me know how I can be supportive. It's nice to finally see this data as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would defer to the Office of Sustainability to speak to ideas of where this is headed next. But I will say that the trees are a great example. I mean, people talked about the trees a lot, and it was fascinating, this tree conversation, because the tree ordinance was certainly a place where people had applied the Garrett toolkit. Okay, and a climate justice screening tool would add the layer of saying, in your consideration of where trees go, where are the heat islands in the city? Not just like who has the best advocacy to say, we want trees, and then beautiful trees in I'll say Montfort, we would love trees, right? But where are the heat islands? It's Pisgah View. Pisgah View is a heat island. They need trees, right? And so there's that kind of assessment, but then there's the complication, and this is where systemic change and interdepartmental collaboration is so powerful. You know, if you came into where I grew up in Chicago, if you came into my neighborhood in Chicago and you started building, and it was the hood, y'all, and you started putting in a bunch of trees and green space and parks, and how long you think they would let us live there? Not long. That's documented. Property taxes go up, the area becomes more appealing, and then you fall into the displacement. So as we're community investing trees in open space and parks, how are you protecting the residents to stay in place and not get pushed out when the neighborhood's nicer and there's trees? So there's a lot of ways that the system's levers and pulleys around why structural inequities exist. This equity analysis helps you to see that and think about it in a climate perspective and an equity perspective that says, yeah, it's not as simple as saying, let's just put all the trees in the BIPOC communities, because after that, there's these unintended impacts that look like all of a sudden the houses' values went up this much and people can't afford to live in those neighborhoods. So that's a great example. And I don't know if Amber, Kira, or Bridget want to speak to the future of this project.
Yes. I think one of the things that I would add to Councilwoman Turner's inquiry is that a part of what we created here, one of the outputs of the climate justice plan, is the climate justice data map that was presented to City Council during the first update, and utilizing that map as a tool to be able to identify things such as heat island effects and additional climate threats within the city is what we will be using alongside the GARE racial toolkit. And through layering the work of the climate justice tool and the GARE racial toolkit, we're hoping to build this climate resilience in a more equitable and just fashion.
I think there was Amy. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not my job. Sorry, I was a facilitator.
Yes, actually, we do need to move on. And Amy, if you could please hold your comments to your presentation. Anna, I'm going to kick the agenda back over to you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. All right. So the next item on the agenda, we're going to go back up to 3A to follow up on the open space consideration. Videla Sadvika with the planning department. The microphone is yours.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I am Videla Sadvika with Planning and Urban Design. I'll try to be brief. I cut some slides out of here so we can move through more quickly, knowing that we lost half an hour. Just a heads up that you can get more information about this at asheville.nc.gov/open space. There's a video on there. I will be talking about that, but I might be going a little bit fast, so you can go to that website for more information. Next slide. So what are we doing, or what are we proposing? The open space amendment that we're suggesting relates to the UDO, so the building code for property in Asheville. This is about the development of private property. I've struck out the Parks Master Plan here to make it clear that although this relates to open spaces in small pockets on parcels throughout the city, this is not about shared public open space. We heard in some of the public comment that there was a concern that, for example, private balconies shouldn't count as open space. Well, a lot of the open space that we're considering isn't open to the public. In a subdivision, you can create open space, but that open space is only actually available unless the subdivision wants to open it up to others. It's not open to the general public. The same with a playground in an apartment complex. It's open space that's primarily for the residents. And that isn't to say that we shouldn't focus on parks and potentially a parks master plan, considering our most recent plan is from 2009, but that's a separate issue. So these are some of the primary goals that that led us in the beginning to look at this. Implementing the comprehensive plan strategy for more housing, reducing barriers to infill. And we'll talk about why that's particularly pertinent to open space. Improving the quality of open space so that it's really good open space for the people who need it. Aligning regulations that are dysfunctional and that contradict or conflict with each other. And simplifying regulations for the community. Next slide, please. As part of the background, I want to highlight that we most recently had about 15 meetings with what we call the Open Space Task Force. Allison and Maggie from Sacee were on that and involved in pretty much all of those, I think. And we had representatives from this diverse list of boards that you see on the screen here. It was challenging because we have so many different interests. But I want to highlight that we decided on a consensus-based decision-making process, which was difficult, but it ultimately led to better outcomes. Now, unfortunately, a couple members walked away from their commitments. And so, it's been, you've heard some of the news from those points of view, but we did reach consensus, and we can talk about any of these specific details. This might be a little bit not the greatest venue for that, but we can definitely go into all that stuff. Oh, sorry, next slide. I was trying to forward it on my screen. So what are the key changes that are coming out of this? These are three of the big ones. Removing barriers to infill, incentivizing stormwater, and making better quality open spaces. Next slide. This chart shows how Asheville's regulations today and proposed, those two, the four bars on the far right, compare to other cities when it comes to open space for residential development. I put that dotted line there to highlight that pretty much everybody agrees that the low end should be about 5%. Some, a couple, a little bit lower, a couple higher. The second big thing I want to highlight is that under the current regulations, our high requirement is exceeding all the others by far. And this is the broken standard that we really need to address. And I'll point that through some visuals. Next slide. This is an example of a building that my wife and I lived in for a year here in 5 Points near Trader Joe's and Harris Teeter. It's on a third of an acre. This was built before the UDO, so the open space regulations were not in effect at that time. But let's play through the scenario. What would happen if they were? Next slide. What you see on the left is the shaded amount is the amount of open space that project would be required to provide had open space regulations been in place. Practically the whole law. Obviously, that's broken. I think everybody can agree to that. And what we're proposing is a ratio to the lot to be much smaller so that it's reasonable and balanced with our other city goals. So there has been some criticism that we're making this massive reduction in open space and that is too large. But the reason that we're doing that is because the code was so broken. Let me show you another example. Next slide. This is a recently proposed project in the Watford area. And again, on the left, those two blue blocks are, each one is a proposed 11-unit building. And what you see is a shaded amount of open space that would have to be required for that project. Almost half the parcel. And what we're proposing again is a tiered system linked to the size of the parcel. You only have to provide less, here I'm showing 10% if you do a higher quality of open space than if you don't, then you have 15%. Next slide. But assuming this doesn't move forward, what kind of open space are we going to get? This slide shows that the current regulations do not necessarily create more open space, and they actually lead to fewer, more expensive units. Because you either have to provide what's on the far left, you can build 22 units, but you have to provide 43% open space, or you can build, if you want to include parking and the other things, you can reduce your unit count to 8 units, and then you only have to provide the 15% open space. So effectively, the look of the product doesn't change. It might still even be a four-story building. Instead of multiple units on each floor now, you'll have 1 unit per floor, and they'll sell for a lot more money. The developer ends up, kind of the same, but the city gets the short end of the stick because we don't get as many housing units and we're not getting any more open space. Land is valuable here, and so we have to be creative and we have to balance these various needs. Next slide. This is an image, briefly just want to highlight from analysis that the company Opticos that has coined the missing middle housing language and has written a book about it. They did analysis for the city of Greensboro, North Carolina. And these are some of the call outs that I found from the plan where they say, except for cottage courts and courtyard building types, do not require on-site open space. Most missing middle housing types have a rear yard that is common space for the units. And then further down below, these districts are required 250 square feet per unit, which is 5 times more than what is needed for missing middle housing. And I'll just say that this city has half as much open space as we do for residential. So this highlights that Asheville, what we're proposing is very balanced and maybe it needs to go further. Next slide. For residential subdivisions, the current regulation says that you have to set aside 20% of open space in the project, but you can kind of circulate it wherever you want. And one problem that we found is a lot of times the open space is placed in the back of properties that have steeper slopes and they're not easy to get to, and it's not a great design. So next slide. What we're proposing is to allow for a reduction in open space in residential subdivisions because they have front yards and backyards anyway. So let's allow that to cut back a little bit, but require the open space on the street frontage so that they can actually have a place that people can get to easily. And most recently, I think you're the first board and commission to see this, we're proposing here in green as an alternative. Instead of providing open space, we can allow the subdivision to simply increase their tree canopy preservation percentage by 10%, and that would meet their open space requirements. So it gives the project more flexibility, but it allows them to pick and choose. And in most cases, I would think that this would benefit tree canopy because property on the frontage is worth a lot. And most developers would want to give up that frontage property that we would require for open space in order to put trees anywhere on the site. Next slide. So for commercial property, I want to highlight that Asheville, unlike other cities, actually requires open space. So we're unique in that way, and we propose to continue to require open space. You see a high bar under the proposed high for Asheville because we came up with a very creative solution to basically artificially inflate the standard for large projects in order to get some stormwater benefits. Next slide. Let me just talk through what that is. This basically what state statute, without getting into the details, state statute disallows any city from requiring sites like this or other sites like the Innsbruck Mall from requiring the project to integrate stormwater if they increase the pervious surfaces. So this project could plant one tree as part of their future plan, along with many buildings, and they don't have to deal with the stormwater. They can just let it run into Patton Avenue and continue to add flooding. So what we're saying, next slide, is that for large sites over an acre, you actually have to set aside half of your entire parcel for open space, which is kind of a big deal. Most projects would not want to do that. So we give them an out, which is an incentive. We say, instead of doing that, you can choose voluntarily to implement stormwater management. This is our way to make sure that we get what the city should be getting from these large sites, large infill sites. And that allows them to then move down to a lower, more reasonable amount of open space. I have a link here, interactive map for parcels by size. If you want to look at sort of the city and how many parcels that would affect, it would affect about 61% of all city land, potentially. Next slide. Finally, we want to create better open spaces that look like this so that people can sit and gather and be social and enjoy each other and hopefully be unmasked soon and live the Asheville life that everybody loves. And to do that, we are suggesting a few things that any project can do in order to get a 5% reduction in open space. Next slide. And that is basically you make more of the open space contiguous, you make it a regular shape that is easy to manage and that people can gather in. You make it flatter so that all people, especially those who have disabilities, can enter and leave. And you provide seating, which is really important. Again, the comment that we heard was that seating is maybe it provides some imperviousness or it's impractical. Well, that's not necessarily true. Seating doesn't have to be impervious and is very practical. It's been demonstrated over and over that successful public spaces need to have seating. Without it, you can't have a successful open space. I think the next slide is the last one, I believe. Yeah, so this is just a summary showing the current regulations on the left and then what we're proposing on the right. A little bit of nuance, but primarily the big difference is a little bit less open space for subdivisions, bringing open space for commercial property down a little bit, and adding more flexibility for residential that has been hamstrung for the last 25 years, and we have not been getting infill to bring about the smart growth policies that have been suggested over and over and over. Many people don't understand how much open space has been undermining infill development. People talk about all kinds of other things. Very few people ever talk about open space. So finally, the last slide is just a timeline. I want to give you all a heads up that we are going to the City Council for a work session in February. That'll be a public meeting where you can listen in and hear the details and the nuance and the questions that are coming from City Council, because they've heard from all of you. And if you want more time as a committee to discuss and to send in comments, we would love it. That gives you, a month to send in questions, and then we can answer specifically anything you have. And then in the springtime, probably soon after that, we'd be going to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then to City Council. So that was the expedited presentation. I'll take any questions or turn it over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vadilla. Does anyone have any questions for him? Excellent. Oh, Allison.
Can I make a couple comments? Allowed? So I just wanted to give a little bit from, as Vadilla said, Maggie and I went to a lot of those 15 or 16 meetings. There was a lot of discussion, which I will not get into right now. But a couple of things, a couple of lingering questions are this 5%. So lowering it to 5%, there was a request to have it be a little higher than 5%, like 7 or 8. So that would be more of a compromise position, because 5 felt pretty low. So I would say that's one of my lingering concerns, is that maybe it should be a little higher. And then the other thing is that the Central Business District and the River Arts District are currently exempted from the open space regulations, and they would continue to be exempted under this new amendment. And we discussed that, but I still wish that there was a way for them to be included. And finally, this fee in lieu. So anything could be included. And the requirements could be large because developers could get away with whatever with a fee in lieu. So that option's still on the table. The question is, which I think was raised in the public comment, is what happens to the fee in lieu? And we're still kind of wrangling that with some of the tree canopy fee in lieu. So, and that, as it's written, has to be used in the neighborhood where the fee was collected. So the actual implementation becomes a little tricky. So those are sort of the lingering questions that I have. And then one other request that Maggie and I had is that that the amendment be revisited every year, say, or two, because we really can't anticipate the interactions. Like, how is it going to interact with a new tree canopy ordinance or stormwater? And there's no way for us to actually know that. So we just want to make sure there's a built-in sort of check-in and revisions as needed. So thanks.
Vadilla, do you want to address Allison's comments? You're still muted.
Sorry. The question about 5% versus 6 or 7 or 8, we could definitely talk about the nuance and how we change them. Just to be clear, currently for some projects we allow 5% open space. So it's not new and it's consistent with most other cities. So I think before we make a decision on whether to adjust it, we need to have a larger discussion about where are we putting downward pressure on development and infill, and where do we want more open space? And I think it's a good question, and might be more appropriate to think about this in context of the shared public open space that is parks, the parks master plan, but not necessarily. The CBD exemptions. So I didn't mention, Allison and Maggie know about this, but a key benefit of the Open Space Task Force that I'm really excited about is that we agreed as this task force to allow the CBD to continue to be exempt from open space and instead to focus on trees and improving tree health. And we created a subcommittee to review the landscaping standards, and big changes that are going to come out of that include a minimum uncompacted soil volume requirement standard for all trees citywide and a third-party inspection process for landscaping. That's going to be huge, and this is taking a whole new amount of time. We have actually bi-weekly meetings on that now. So that was a compromise that was made in those meetings to move in that direction. So I would be concerned about unraveling that and what that may mean. It's always possible, but that would be a concern. The fee in lieu, the reason we are not clarifying how funds can be used more than they are written today is because there are several lawsuits currently underway, and our legal department has told us that we would be jeopardizing our own resources should we currently implement some new language and potentially get sued by similar organizations or persons who are creating these lawsuits somewhere else. So this is just basically telling us to hold on, wait till those lawsuits are done, and then to firm up our policies based on those findings. And we're definitely down for revisiting the ordinance as time goes by. That's a great idea, and we need to put that on the books. Thank you.
Chris, you had a question?
I did, thank you. You may have just answered it, but for clarification, you mentioned the idea of a third-party review for landscaping for public property, and then my question from your presentation was around, the option to preserve trees on private land, which is what your presentation was on. And would there be any sort of evaluation as to the quality of that tree preservation or addition on private property, similar to what you discussed for public land?
Okay, so to be clear, this third-party process for landscaping inspection isn't just for public land. It would be for any project that triggers landscaping requirements. So this could be a commercial development, it could be an apartment complex, it could be an Arby's that has to plant some trees. Basically, instead of just having Joe Schmo come and plant your landscaping, it would have to be certified by a registered landscape architect or arborist to ensure that they're planted correctly and they survive and thrive and have the right soil volume. When it comes to private property and trees, we have a tree preservation ordinance that incorporates preservation of trees on all property that meets certain triggers. So any space that, like I was talking about, and these examples for open space would also have to meet the tree preservation ordinance. They can go together, but they don't have to overlap. For example, in open spaces, you're not required to plant trees. Your open space could be completely grass. Some people in their design might want just a place for students or whoever to hang out on the lawn, right? But if you also are required to provide trees as part of tree canopy preservation, in many instances, many designs, you would integrate those two. So the open space and the tree preservation might overlap, but it doesn't have to. So they're meant to work together, I guess, is a short way of thinking about it.
Great, thank you. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Sage, you had a question? And let's have that be our last question.
Yeah, and I'll just be brief. I just want to share my concerns about what happened with the tree canopy ordinance and not having a plan for when it comes into play. And I heard someone, I think it was Allison, mention that. So, if we're going to stall this and continue to have work sessions and not hear it for several months, maybe we can queue up what that process will look like. I mean, I don't think we need to know it right away because there won't be funds in the pot right away, but, being able to come to council and tell us what that process looks like would be helpful. how we'll identify it, who will it be, where we start, anything.
You mean for open space, not for tree preservation?
For open space, correct. I don't want us
Right.
to do that again, because right now, if there was money in the tree canopy fund, we wouldn't even know where to do with it. So somehow outlining how we get to that plan, I don't expect us to have it at the time of adoption, but the process of how we'll identify the plan would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, again, our direction has been that we shouldn't be refining that until we understand what the courts have dictated for what is reasonable and how the funds can be used. So if we were to try to do that now, we would be working in front of that process, and it might lead to us getting sued, and that would be undermined. I will say we have, since over 10 years, accumulated just about a little bit over $200,000 in our open space fund, which isn't a ton of money, especially if we're wanting to acquire land. It can't be used for maintenance. So we need to think about maybe it can be coupled with the tree fund money. So maybe we can acquire like a park and plant trees there. But you're right, that stuff has to happen. We need to figure.
Yeah, let's get thinking about it. That's all. Thank you. And Vidila, I don't know if y'all know, Vidila's been working on this for years. So just major thank you. I mean, your patience is admirable.
Thank you so much, Vidila. All right, so let's jump to the next item on the agenda. Item 3C, Energy Working Group. Chris, are you going to give us a update on the state energy update?
Sure, I'll keep it short and hopefully sweet. There are some links here to the Executive Order 246 and HB 951 that I will attempt to give you some words about without a pretty picture, but hopefully these words will be impactful. So as we've spoken about, and as many of you already likely know about, House Bill 951 that was passed last year, Governor Cooper signed an executive order last week, Executive Order 246, that aligns nicely with House Bill 951. House Bill 951, as a quick recap, commits the Utility Commission of North Carolina to develop a plan to meet greenhouse gas reduction goals. I believe it's 50% by 2030, based on a 2005 base year, and then net zero by 2050. So that's within the utility sector, right? The energy generation capacity in North Carolina. Without getting into the details of potential issues or talking points on 951, here is Executive Order 246, which is statewide, and the goal is very similar to House Bill 951's goal. The dates are the same, or the time periods are the same. The percentage is just a little bit different. So Governor Cooper's aiming to do 50% reduction by 2030 with net zero by 2050. So same time frame as the House Bill 951 for the utility sector. And now we've got a statewide goal of 50% reduction by 2030. There's a lot of interesting things, and I'll keep these short. To my personal things that I find interesting is that I don't know when the last North Carolina greenhouse gas inventory was completed, but this executive order articulates that the next greenhouse gas inventory for North Carolina is to be generated by the end of this month. So in January 2022, we should have, as led by the Department of Environmental Quality, should have a statewide greenhouse gas inventory for North Carolina. That's extremely important because you can't reduce what you don't measure. So in addition to having the full inventory by the end of this month, it will be recalculated every 2 years, according to this executive order. So in theory, we'll be able to track progress against whatever's going to be developed, which the executive order articulates as well. There's a requirement to, develop some deep decarbonization pathways And, it seems like all options are on the table. And I believe that report is to be due by the end of this year, I believe, but sometime in the near future. So this executive order, it has the potential to do a lot of decarbonization within our state, and a lot of progress, also related to climate justice. The one last bit I'll say about it, which I personally was really excited about as someone, a sustainability professional in the private sector. This bill articulates the need for state cabinets and agencies to identify I believe, I can't remember the language that it used, but more or less a climate justice person within each of those agencies. So it's kind of the sustainability professional's dream to have a counterpart within each sector of the community to talk to and, drive initiatives. And this executive order seems to do that. So every agency within the state should have their own dedicated climate justice person to help drive some of these executive orders commitments. I'll stop there. And if anyone has any interesting questions, I probably won't be able to answer them, but just know that there's some interesting stuff happening at the state level to help drive the decarbonization within our state.
Michael, you had a question?
Chris, was there anything in the bill that indicated that for the greenhouse gas inventory, they're going to up their game in terms of, we've seen so much in recent years that the underestimates in methane from landfill is now twice the level that they were previously talking about. Similarly with all drilling, although I don't think we have much drilling in North Carolina, but certainly with the farms, I also understand that's inadequately measured. So will they give us a false report that relies on these old numbers, or are they actually going to do some new discovery?
It's an interesting question. And my only hunch is the short answer is I didn't see any articulation about potential issues with the existing greenhouse gas inventory. But my assumption is that because it's going to be driven by a public entity, the Department of Environmental Quality, is that I imagine there would be a public review or at least comment session to identify potential issues. That's my assumption. So hopefully that would occur.
Steve, you had a question, and let's make this our last question on
Yeah,
this.
no, just one follow-up to this discussion. That on the greenhouse gas inventory update, it's in the executive order, and it actually requires the first update to be released January 31st. So you can take a look and see what it does and what it doesn't do. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve and Chris, for giving us that interesting update. Look forward to hearing more about it. All right, next item on the agenda, number 4, is old business, which will be the discussion and approval of the annual report. Thank you all so much for helping work on that in your small groups and getting me your sections, and I really appreciate it. And I also want to thank those of you who've already sent me edits to compile into the draft that was circulated. I wish I could say that was an intentional Easter egg that I threw in there that 3 of you caught in the first paragraph, I believe, noting that there were 3 sections when there were actually 4 sections, but that was just an overlook. So we had a couple of, I guess let's go ahead and get a motion in a second, and then we'll do a discussion.
What are we motioning for? Sorry.
A motion to approve the annual report.
I'll motion to approve it.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Okay. So now we can discuss the approval. My discussion would be we'll incorporate the edits that have already been sent in. One of which I've already mentioned. Others came from Steve, and there were just some formatting, other minor edits. Did anyone else have any edits that they would like to discuss and have implemented in the final draft of the annual report? So I guess if nobody has any other comments, we could vote in favor of me implementing these edits. And then that would be the final draft going to City Council. Okay, so I'm going to do a roll call. You all can say yay or nay to approve the annual report with the edits incorporated. If that sounds good. Okay, here we go. Where's my list? Let's do Ann Keller.
Aye.
Kim.
Aye.
Maggie.
Aye.
Tim.
Aye.
Chris.
Thanks for putting it together. Aye.
You're welcome. Steve.
Aye.
Allison.
Aye.
Michael.
Aye.
And I as well say aye. Another notable edit was to replace Keith's name with Michael's name. And I just wanted to make sure that that was what we were supposed to do, Amber, since this is a 2021 report. I didn't know if Keith was supposed to be on it or Michael was supposed to be on it.
I believe you would keep Keith on that report.
Keep Keith on it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Thank
Cool.
you for asking.
Yes. Okay. Next on the agenda. Number 5, new business. The first item is a presentation in support of the Coalition for a Bird-Friendly Asheville Bird Safe Migration Proclamation plus Education Campaign. Paulina Jones, Sarah Brannigan, and Danielle Lenaway will be presenting.
Are we okay to start?
Yes, thank you. Sorry. And also, if you all, those of you who aren't presenting, please make sure to mute yourself. Thanks. Take it away, Paulina.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name's Paulina Jones, and I'm here with Sarah Brannigan and Danielle DeBella-Lenaway. We've been working for the past year on assembling the first of what we hope is many steps to introduce to the city to adopt and instill bird-friendly city practices. We're a migratory bird kind of advocacy group, and fatal bird window collisions are a major problem in our migratory bird populations across the country. So we've assembled this proclamation. I believe you all have received a copy of it at this point. So we wanted to open up first for any questions and then move into kind of our timeline and what we think this educational outreach campaign surrounding this proclamation will look like, so we can take a proclaimed commitment to bird-friendly building practices across the city and turn it into an actual, like, tangible campaign that will have tangible results and ultimately reduce migratory songbird mortality in our city. So I guess we'll start. For those who have had a chance to review this proclamation, are there any questions that you all have for us, or do you want us to kind of outline any of the specific details for you all? Thank you, Allison. I guess I could do just a brief overview. So a study came out a couple years ago that estimated between like 700 million to 900 million birds fatally collide with windows in the continuous United States every single year. I did my undergraduate research project at UNCA studying fatal bird window collisions on campus, and during the course of that study, observed over 150 collisions, which, given certain statistics, like 1 in 8 birds that collide with windows die immediately upon impact. Using that, I could kind of estimate that over 1,000 birds had collided with windows just on the UNCA campus. So the Coalition for Bird Friendly Asheville, in partnership with our local Blue Ridge Audubon chapter, as well as North Carolina Audubon, National Audubon, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and quite a few different local environmental organizations, are wanting to help guide the city in building an educational outreach campaign that's directed at residence owners and business owners, that essentially outlines how the city can implement a lights out program, which will reduce light pollution, have the added benefit of saving energy, and ultimately reduce the number of birds that are drawn into the city by light pollution and therefore become more susceptible to fatally colliding with windows while they're migrating during the fall and spring, which are the major migratory seasons. And there's been quite a number of cities around the country who have implemented lights out programs. Philadelphia was one of the most recent ones to adopt a lights out program after a mass collision event. And we would really like to model a lot of our educational outreach programs around some of the programs that these other cities have implemented. And yeah, so through the guidance of North Carolina Audubon, National Audubon, we are hoping to build an educational outreach campaign that, you know, there'll be one flavor kind of targeted more so at business owners to meet their needs, and another that's targeted more so at city residents. Yeah. And Sarah, Danielle, either of you would like to elaborate on that?
I can talk a little more about the education program if we're ready for that, or if we have any questions on the proclamation part, go for it.
I don't have a question, but it just occurs to me that a co-benefit of creating awareness and implementing this would be decreasing greenhouse gas emission effects lights. And people would, in the long term, save a couple of pennies maybe here and there.
Michael, you had a question?
Yeah, for dark or lights out, one of the things I noticed is other cities are adopting lights out with putting sensors, motion sensors on the street lights, which can help to reduce their being on a third to half the time in you know, the non-CBD areas. Is that anything that you were thinking about?
Yeah, so kind of our main approaches to a lights out program would be first to just, you know, in general, extinguish unnecessary lights that are left on all night. You know, and that's where a lot of our educational outreach campaign will come into play with business owners and private residencies that have lights that, you know, don't really need to be on. That would be our first way to address this. The second would be to have timers installed, as you mentioned, on buildings throughout the city. We would like to start with city-owned buildings, having timers installed to just, again, kind of regulate that light that's being emitted at 3 a.m. that we're not really using. And then for those lights that are external that can't be extinguished, either for safety reasons or other reasons, we would like to address either the temperature of the light. So if we can warm the temperature of the bulb slightly, that helps reduce light pollution, but also installing down shields so we don't have light just radiating up into the night sky. It's only being, it's only illuminating the areas where it's needed. That would be our third approach.
Yes, the dark sky compliance I find would be very important. I don't know if you've teamed up with the Astronomy Asheville group, but they've been trying to push this for years, and the some of the standards are still pretty outdated when it comes to looking at lighting codes, and also even all the front porch lights. I see hardly any that really are down hooded, so or they're not fully down hooded. They have an enormous amount of leakage. So.
Yeah, we've been in collaboration with our local dark sky chapter, if you will, and also have had some conversations with the International Dark Sky Association. And so they are definitely going to be a valuable partner in our educational outreach building process of this project.
Excellent.
All right, I'll go ahead and talk about the education a little bit more. So kind of as Paulina mentioned, we really want to target the community because that's where these strikes are happening. In the city, we would like to start with city-owned buildings, work directly with business managers, building owners to get the awareness out there about these strikes that are happening at night with a really easy solution. And then we would also like to use our local community organizations like Audubon, the other conservation organizations we've teamed up with to get really into the residential areas where obviously the proclamation isn't going to affect that as much. To just get the word out there that this is happening, and if you turn off your lights, you can prevent some of these deaths and save some money. So ideally, that's where our education outreach program will focus with business owners and kind of residential communities. Let's see. Should I walk through the timeline, or have we seen that already? All right, I'll go through the timeline. So obviously this is happening today. That's our first step, is to kind of finalize the language for this proclamation. Then we'll head out to no worries. Me and Danielle, who are on the board of Blue Ridge Audubon, will go to our next board meeting and talk about ways that we can collaborate on this outreach education program. I'll get that going hopefully by early February so we can get this underway before spring migration starts in March. Yeah. Danielle, did you want to take over some of the partnership stuff?
I don't know if Danielle has unmuted herself or.
No. Working on it.
In the meantime, Michael, if you have a question, feel free.
And there's been research that shows that a lot of the cities that have converted to LED street lights are overlit by a factor of 2 or 3, and they've done retrofits to reduce them by 25 to 50%, and people are much happier. I was wondering if that was another one that you're going to encourage.
Okay, can you hear me now? No?
Yeah.
Yes, yay, okay, oh gosh. All right, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm going to talk about some of our partnerships as well as about, which is going to be a key agenda for us, is forming an advisory committee with these named partners. You see the list that's already been posted. Not only Blue Ridge, but we also have National and North Carolina Audubon by our side. The Sierra Club, Mountain True, Dark Skies mentioned, the Astronomy Club, Greenworks are just a few. We've also talked to some individual groups. So we're pretty excited by the support we're getting. And I think there's a lot to be said of forming a decent advisory committee, which is going to hopefully take part immediately. That's kind of our first goal. The thing is that I added into this spectrum is an outreach position to oversee operations. And this basically would be funded as of now with the Blue Ridge Audubon chapter and for grant monies. There's already some money sitting in our budget to get this going. So I think it's pretty positive that we have some people to get this all done professionally in line and getting up immediately. Then the girls and I were talking last night of, it would be great to make, I call it the ABCs, Asheville Bird City. And we now have people such as architects, have created some new light technology and things that I think are super positive, that could be very well applied into the city program, as well as UNC. Paulina could probably talk about this a little bit more, but they have this new technology they're using for launching balloons and things like that. So there's a lot of positive things happening within Asheville that they're really trying to work on this bird agenda. So just a little taste.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so we're gonna hold the rest of our comments till the end of the presentations. Okay, Steve, we have one more question, and let's make this the last question.
Yeah, it's a question of procedure for us.
Okay.
At an appropriate time, I think that we'd want to consider a motion to recommend that Sacee recommend that the city council approve and issue this proclamation. And I didn't know whether this is the right time to do that, in which case I would make that motion, or if you wanted to wait.
Perfect timing.
Or if that's not what you.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Steve. Does anyone want to second Steve's motion?
I'll second it.
All right, Michael. Let's go down the list to get a yay or nay. Anne.
Yes, aye, yay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yay.
Maggie.
Yay.
Tim.
Yay.
Michael.
Yay.
Chris. It's gone. Steve.
Yay.
Allison is also gone, but she commented in the chat that she was for it. I'm not sure if that will suffice, but I'm also in favor. All right. Thank you, ladies, so much for presenting and coming up with a proclamation. We're very excited for this movement.
Thank you so much. We're very excited for this. It's going to be a great program and hopefully a great success.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Added thank you to the Energy Working Group for their help in us crafting
Absolutely.
the language, right? So
Yeah, we appreciate your support and all your efforts, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much. All right. So next on the agenda, and I'm sorry again that we're running over time, but we'll try to keep the rest of this pretty short. Next item on new business is 5B, presentation letter support of Urban Forestry Commission recommendations by Amy Smith. Amy, are you ready?
I am so ready. Thank you so much for having me. I'll be as brief as I can, but I really appreciate y'all giving me some time to talk to you on behalf of the Urban Forestry Commission. And I saw Sage is still here. Real quick before I forget, I do want to address the fee in lieu money that we've been collecting through the Urban Canopy Protection Amendment. We are creating a framework. It is mostly done. We're working with city staff to create that framework so that we do have a plan for spending that money. Obviously, we're taking our time to make sure we get that framework prioritized the best way we can. So just wanted to let y'all know we are working on that because our fund is separate from the open space fund. So, all right, next slide, please. So what is a comprehensive urban forestry program? So the city of Asheville has the Urban Forestry Commission. We have a city arborist, but we do not have an overreaching plan for how to preserve and protect our urban forest. Unlike wild forests, urban forests have to be managed. They don't just spontaneously grow. They must be planted, managed for risk, and really led along. If we want an urban forest in the future, that is what we envision for our city. In October of 21, the UFC passed a recommendation to City Council outlining the need for the comprehensive urban forestry program and sent that along to Council. What we're looking for is funding for an urban forester position and the creation of an urban forest master plan. I'll briefly go into detail about those, give you some information. But what we're seeking here is really that funding to put those pieces in place so that we can have this planning and oversight and management that we need for the urban forest. Obviously, I'm speaking to the choir here that we know that urban forests are important in carbon sequestration, stormwater, housing, property values, tourism, recreation. We know they play a role in equity. I'm going to talk about that. I know Marisol pointed that out. We had that discussion about trees. I was like, let me in. But we know that it's important for equity issues as well. And all of this urban forestry plays a role in the green infrastructure that'll help save money in the future. There are studies that show that for every dollar spent on urban forestry, cities can achieve up to $3 in savings with all of these pieces together, particularly stormwater and carbon sequestration and energy savings as well. Next slide, please. So what will an urban forester do for the city? Real quickly, we are estimating about an $80,000 a year expenditure on this position, including salary, benefits, travel, all the rest of that. The urban forester is that professional. It is a professional job. There is a title and people who train in this. That person will oversee all the rest of this program. They are separate from the city arborist, who is primarily looking at risk management. You know, a tree falls down in the road, the arborist goes out, sends the crews out to clean that up. Planting trees on city streets, that's the city arborist, but that is not sufficient to manage an entire urban forest. So we need that leadership position to oversee this whole thing. We need the leadership position to help us with our fee and lieu funds. So how are we going to properly spend that money with the lens of equity, with the lens of stormwater and green infrastructure? Having this person to coordinate between offices like the Office of Sustainability, Development Services, Public Works, having that person in the position is what's going to put all of this together. They can also leverage nonprofit funds. We have excellent nonprofits in our city. We work really closely with Asheville Greenworks as the Urban Forestry Commission, but we can do more to leverage grant money and nonprofit support. And that's what the urban forester would do. Next slide, please. So what will an urban forest master plan do? We are requesting about $250,000. That'd be a one-time spend for the urban forest master plan. Two big key pieces of the plan. First of all, it's a full comprehensive inventory of all public trees. This is an on the ground, measure the tree, what is its species, what is its health, and that gives us the data that we need to build the rest of the plan. We do not have a full inventory of even public trees, let alone private trees in Asheville. So we don't know what we're dealing with. We have a Canopy study that's, aerial view, but having that on the ground data is what will build the rest of this. The Urban Forest Master Plan plays to the three pieces of sustainability, environmental, social, and economic built into the plan. It puts together input from the community. So a big part of building the plan is having meetings with community members of all parts of the community, getting their input of what they want to see with the urban forest, what outcomes do they desire, and putting that together with the environmental, social, and economic goals that we know are important with the city. So the outcomes we expect from the plan would be, again, that assessment of the current condition, the inventory, the biodiversity. We know that to alleviate future risk from pest, disease, fire, all of that, we need to have a biodiverse urban forest. We can set goals for that future condition, identify gaps, and engage stakeholders to actually achieve those outcomes. All right, next slide, please. So again, with the plan, can go through this real quick. So we know that we're going to assess the resources, the community, and the vegetation. And the big key of an urban forest master plan is it's not a plan that you write up and set aside. It is a framework, and it's actually very detailed. If you ever want to see one, you can look them up for other cities, but it's extremely detailed and shows you the pathway to reach your goals. So it's something that is a living document. It's flexible, climate adaptive, utilizes current best management practices. And the big goal is to just optimize the urban forest and manage for the future. Another thing that we don't have a good assessment of in Asheville right now are risks from climate change, from storms. We don't have great plans, let alone for the urban forest, but how that builds into community plans for storm risk and things like that. Again, equity focused and engaged with the community. And I just want to really highlight that this is something the Urban Forestry Commission has already been working on for several years with the equity lens. All the decisions we are currently making, we try to bring back around to equity, including any work that we do with a future urban forester and urban forest master plan. Next slide, please. So what have we done so far? Most of you might be aware with some of this work that we've already done. A few years ago, there was an audit that was completed. We call it the gap analysis, and it highlighted the need for an urban forester and urban forest master plan, as well as some ordinance revisions. We had the tree canopy analysis completed in 2018. That took a 2008 to 2018 look at where our canopy has gone. Many of you have seen that, and I can get it to you if you don't have it. The image on the top right is from that, or left, sorry, from that tree canopy analysis showing where we have lost trees over that 10-year timeline. It's very rarely a couple places have gained trees, so we're really looking at tree loss. Another thing that we had done, this was with NASA, urban heat island analysis was completed. That's the image on the bottom there. And they put together not only the surface air temperature and the tree canopy, but also what they called a vulnerability index. So looking at communities of low income, a lot of elderly people, those other community contingencies that are considered vulnerable to the loss of canopy and to urban heat island. So we do have that data, and it is helping us, for example, in our framework for spending the fee and lieu funds. We did adopt the tree canopy preservation amendment and a zero net loss resolution. That resolution was sent to council and they did approve it, which means that the city does have a goal to not lose any more canopy. We must replace and preserve the canopy we have now with the goal of increasing it in the future. Let's see. Oh, the database comprehensive urban tree inventory, that is what we are hoping to achieve with the on the ground measurements, along with stakeholder analysis at the neighborhood level. Asheville Greenworks has started a project that they have grant funding for to begin some of those neighborhood vignettes where people can get together and actually talk about their needs, wants, and desires with urban forestry. And we do hope to develop the urban forest master plan. You know, we're kind of at a point with or without city council help, we're going to get this done, but it really would be helpful if we can get city council to invest in this and show that it's important for them and for the city to have these pieces in place. Next slide, please. The work that we're doing as the Urban Forestry Commission, we would really try to make sure we align with everything else that the city is working on that relates to tree canopy, including the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, the Climate Resiliency Assessment and Climate Justice Initiative, and the Sustainability Management Plan. And that's part of why I'm here with you all, is that we recognize that this is a collaborative process, that we need everyone on board to achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve. In particularly with the comp plan, trees are mentioned. Somebody counted, and I wish I remembered how many times trees and urban forestry are mentioned in the comp plan. It's a bunch. We know that they're important, and City Council has recognized that. And so now we're asking for those next steps. Next slide, please. So what we're looking for today is your support in endorsing the need for the comprehensive urban forestry program. You received a copy of the resolution that the UFC passed asking for the funding to fund the urban forester and the urban forest master plan. So we're looking for other boards and commissions to come on with their support as well. So that's why I'm here. That's what we're asking for and hoping that you'll help us out. So let me know if there are any questions. Sorry, I know that was super fast, so.
Steve, you had a question?
Yes, you can hear me. Yes. Hi, Amy. Thank you, and thanks for sending the that early resolution to me. The resolution you just talked about that you're looking for support from. To be clear, is that the document that you shared with us? This the one that talks about situation solution, or is that a separate document?
I believe so. I think that's what's linked in your agenda.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I did have just a couple quick questions about that. I was thinking, you had mentioned the two primary cost components for doing this: the salary, $80,000 salary, and the estimate of $250,000 to do the plan. And I think your memo, or maybe it was the earlier resolution, I don't remember, said that there might be a need to have a periodic canopy studies done by an outside contractor, and that would be some additional cost. My question is, keys off of, considering those costs and yours and the statement in the request for support, where you say many other cities have faced the same problem and have learned that such a program is an excellent investment. Have you been able to draw from those studies in a way to put together some kind of analysis showing that in how cost effective it would be to make the investment for Asheville?
Yeah, like I mentioned at the beginning, there are scientific studies that have looked at the cost benefit analysis, and it's a wide range, obviously, but on average, for every dollar spent, cities can achieve around $3 in benefits back. And that includes all of the stormwater, carbon sequestration, energy benefits. So we do see it as an investment in the future.
Right. I guess, do those studies draw on the actual experience of these many other cities, and which cities are?
Yeah, and again, there's many studies. So, if you want offline, I can send you some of that data. I didn't bring it with me, I'm sorry. But yeah, it is something that has been scientifically studied and published.
Thank you.
Michael, you had a question?
Yeah, first of all, to Steve's question, I've been working on urban trees since 1980 on the urban heat island. And just as you say, I mean, the American Forest Association with their city green starting then started doing cities and have done scores of cities showing much larger benefits. I think than, you must mean $3 a year benefits?
Again, the studies vary on how they average it out. So I'm just plucking a number to give you guys an idea of the range.
The I3 now does the same thing. But my concern was, traditionally, urban foresters have been known as morticians because they've ignored the biodiversity rule that you, I think, included. And I hope that gets firmly entrenched, the 10, 20, 30 rule between, don't plant any species more than 10%, no genus more than 20, and no family more than 30%, which was totally abandoned. And now we have so many cities facing longhorn beetles, et cetera. The implementation is my concern because the foresters tend to look at how do I gather all the fallen leaves at the same time for collection or some other reason that leads them to long streets of monoculture. So likewise, also the planting these trees historically in urban areas, they've been backfilled with the kind of brick and cementitious fill from the new building. So these trees typically die well within 10 years and they don't show their economic benefits until 15 years plus. So are you going to be specific with the implementation side of things?
Yeah, so there's two parts to your comment there. The first, the urban forester, obviously that's a hiring decision, but if the UFC can have some input, we have many science-based members on the UFC, and the current science is definitely leaning toward, all those things you mentioned, biodiversity, planting standards, and, someone who understands how it all comes together. And that's why we're seeking the position, is to have someone on staff who can get all of those pieces on the same page. To the planting standards, Vidila mentioned that there is a group right now, an interdisciplinary group that is updating the landscaping standards, including planting for the whole city. So that is actually in the works right now, regardless of this ask.
Sage, let's get one final question from you.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for all your work on this. Can you do two things? Can you send me any examples of urban forestry tree plans there are that you've seen executed? And can you fill me in on how y'all got to the $250,000 cost? If there's like an example out there, an RFP or something, and just maybe email that to me. I don't want to consume the whole committee time, but that would be helpful.
Just real quick to address that, because people might want to know. So generally speaking, outside consultants help with the plans. And so we've received that number from sort of an average of what the open market is charging. And the key piece is the inventory. So just understanding, how big our city is and how much it would take to do that on the ground inventory. That's about half, a little more than half of that plan cost. And as far as urban forest master plans, that's my research. I can send you more than you'd ever want, but I'll pull out a couple and send you some good examples.
Thank you. I would appreciate that. And I believe this will be the third or fourth budget round that it will be a request.
I believe it's the fourth. 2020 was, we didn't get a lot of input in that one, but yeah, we've been asking for it for, I think, about 4 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. All right. So this brings us to the meat of this one, where we make a motion to support this letter of support. Does anyone care to make a motion?
I'll move for a motion to pass the resolution.
All right.
Endorse, embrace.
Endorse
It's a letter of support.
Letter of support, excuse me.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone would like to second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Anne. Any more discussion on the letter of support? Okay, I'm going to run down the list. Here we go. Anne.
Aye.
Kim. Might not be with us anymore. Doesn't look like she is. Maggie.
Aye.
Tim.
Aye.
Michael.
Yay.
Steve.
Aye.
And I am also an aye. Allison also said in her chat that she was as well. All right. We're all in favor of sending the letter of support on behalf of the UFC. Thank you so much, Amy, for your presentation and working with us over the past few months. We really appreciate it. And Anne, too, and others who worked with you.
Oh, and real quick, I just want to offer that, the UFC, this can go both ways. We're happy to work together with Sacee on your endeavors as well.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. All right. Last item on the agenda is to approve the chair and the vice chair positions and introduction to the new Sacee member, which is Michael. Michael, you already did your formal introduction at the beginning, so sorry I jumped ahead on that. But myself and Anne are volunteering to continue to serve in the role of chair and vice chair. Happy to discuss if anyone else wants to take those roles from us, but if not, we could take a motion to approve continuing in these seats.
I'll make a motion to continue.
Thank you. Thanks, Maggie. Anyone want a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, let's run down the list. Anne.
Can I vote on myself? I'm not sure, but I'll vote on you. I'll vote on you.
Okay. Maggie.
Yes, aye.
Tim.
Aye.
Michael.
Aye.
Steve.
I don't know. Oh, aye, and thank you both.
Thanks, Steve. And I also am an aye for Anne and not for myself. All right. Congratulations, Anne. Thank you for serving as vice chair. One more year
Anna.
for your final year. So both Chris and I were also voted by City Council to continue to serve a second term. So you're stuck with me for another 3 years. And we appreciate everyone. And Michael for joining us. I hope you had a good time. Normally we don't have a 30-minute delay, but we do appreciate everyone being patient. And our next meeting will be in March, so stay tuned for that. And I'll see you all next